Welcome to Hence the Future podcast. I'm Mattimore Cronin,
I'm Justin Clark.
and today we're discussing the future of habits. That means we'll explore how habits are formed, how to break bad habits through the golden rule for habit change, why New Year's resolutions so often fail, and how habits are likely to evolve in the future. To start, Justin, perhaps you can describe how habits are formed and what's going on is the brain as we grow and learn new behaviors.
Yeah, so when we first learn things, whether it's actions like how to open a door or associations, a lot of brain power is initially used when you're forming these initial connections or these first connections and pathways in your brain. But once enough repetition has taken place, it actually turns out that in the mind or in your brain, the amount of energy required to send to activate these pathways, these neuronal pathways, is a lot less than when these habits or learnings, associations, actions were initially formed. So, in the context of habits, these default actions and associations are actually considered habits.
hmm Yeah, it's definitely an energy saving mechanism where we
Hmm.
encode certain actions that start off being really difficult. Like, I remember
Hmm.
the first time I was learning how to drive, and it's a little bit
Hmm.
terrifying. Like, especially when
Yep.
you're backing up, you're looking at your rearview mirror, you're deciding how far the car behind you really is based on what the mirror looks like.
Hmm.
It's really difficult when you're first learning the action, but once you've done it enough times with enough repetitions, like you say, it becomes encoded specifically in the basal ganglia part of the brain.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's a really deep part of the brain that's almost at the root of the brain
Hmm.
stem. And there's been some pretty incredible experiments where one man, Eugene, had damaged his brain to such an extent that he could not remember almost anything. He couldn't create new memories. And you could
Hmm.
even ask him in his home, you know, where is the kitchen? Where is the bathroom? Where is your bedroom? And he had no idea. Like he couldn't
Yep.
answer the simplest questions. But then when you said, "What do you do when you're hungry?" he would just automatically walk over to the kitchen that he purportedly didn't know where it was, go
Uh,
into one particular drawer, take out a bowl of nuts, and eat it. And so
huh.
that's because even though he didn't have his memory, he had it encoded deep in his basal ganglia. And that's
Hmm.
like the power of habits are just so deep rooted. And
Hmm.
you brought up the other interesting concept, which is the default mode network. And this is
Mm.
sort of your whole network of the, automated actions that you do every
Yep.
day just based on repetition.
Hmm.
So, like for instance, in my own habitual schedule, every morning I have my sort of wake up routine where I go, I brush my teeth, I do my thing. Then I have my driving routine where I drive to work and I listen to the daily. And then I get
Hmm.
to work and then I have my work routine where I, get a coffee and order breakfast and, do whatever I need to do, like make my to-do list for the day. And then
Hmm.
some of the stuff you do at work is truly novel. Like you get an email for some new project that you've never heard about before. And that
Hmm.
requires real thinking and a lot more thought power. But then most of your day, you drive home, you have that routine, you have your evening routine, whatever that is, whether it's watching TV or working out, and then you have
Yep.
your bedtime routine. Uh, Scientists and cognitive behavioral psychologists have estimated that between 40 and 95% of all daily actions are habits. So only a
Wow.
small percentage of what we do day to day is not
Hmm.
habit
Yeah.
based.
And it probably depends on who the person is, right? If you're a factory worker that has a very rigid schedule and you basically do the same exact thing every day, it might be closer to the 95%. Whereas
hmm
if you're a creative and you try to, you go out and you try to do something a little bit different every day, then maybe it's a little bit closer to the 40%. But either way, that's a very high percentage. Like when I was reading this book, Power of Habit,
hmm
I did not realize it was that high
Yeah.
until I saw that.
Yeah, it's similar to also Daniel Kahneman's notion of thinking fast and slow, where
Yep.
most of the thinking we do is fast. It's immediate. We don't even have to consider something for more than half a second. We
Hmm.
immediately know what to do in a given situation. But the slow thinking is sort of the deliberate, rational, creative, really considering a concept and almost in a meditative mindset, letting yourself absorb it and think about it from all angles. And that's
Hmm.
much more rare. Another concept I think is useful is this idea of chunking.
Mm.
And by studying the brain, scientists have found out that we chunk certain behaviors and certain situations as in the brain as something that becomes automatic over time. So like I said, my bathroom routine, that's one chunk of behavior. Or,
Hmm.
what you do when you get a phone call, you have a certain way that you like answer the call and, the friendly,
Yep.
sociable type
Yep.
of norms sort of take over. There's all these
Hmm.
different like chunking of behavior. And
Yeah.
that's a lot of what learning is. It's like you start with this blank slate as a baby where you don't even really see a difference between yourself and the environment in which you're inhabiting. But then over time, you start to chunk certain behaviors like, oh, here's what
Hmm.
happens when it's time for eating. Here's what happens when it's time for sleeping. Here's what happens when it's time for playtime. And you build these chunks up over time until there's very little of your life that you even need to consider in any deep way. Most of it's just purely automatic.
Hmm. And one of the really cool things about, this chunking and this learning is really just how awesome the brain is at learning. So we can learn things that are not necessarily exactly related to a habit we want to form, but it's peripherally related. And this sort of chunking lets your brain pick out things from other learnings and other things that have happened to you, and you can learn new tasks faster or learn new habits faster. And we've also talked a lot about how habits are formed. How do we how do we break these habits? Like
Yeah,
that's
that's a
that's kind
great
of the big
question.
one, because sometimes we have habits that serve us, but we also have habits that don't serve us.
Totally. Yeah, so let's take an example. So
Okay.
a lot of most smokers start in their teenage years. There's very few people that pick up smoking when you're like 30 or 40 years old.
Hmm.
And how that usually starts, whether it's smoking cigarettes or vaping jewels, is usually you're in sociable situations with friends and you're juuling as a way to sort of be more sociable. It helps you
Hmm.
relax a little bit. You start to associate it with, going out in the town and having fun with your
Yep.
friends and partying, and
Hmm.
maybe also you associate it with some romantic encounters that you have,
Yep.
and that becomes so ingrained as like a pleasurable activity that you associate with having a good time that
Hmm.
when you fast forward 20 years and you're still juuling just on your couch alone in your apartment, there's no longer the rewards of being sociable or being with friends. Like that whole context is gone, but the
Hmm.
pattern, the habit has been so ingrained deep in your basal ganglia that
Hmm.
it's almost impossible, or it feels impossible, to actually change that habit and to stop.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
this brings us to the golden rule for habit change. And that is that if you keep the cue and the reward constant, but you change the routine, that's how you can change a habit. So
Yeah.
every habit, they call it the habit loop, meaning there's a
Okay.
cue, which is, I'm sitting on the couch, I'm feeling a little bit stressed or anxious, and so I automatically sort of reach for my jewel. And then there's the routine, which is that's reaching for your jewel, putting it to your lips and inhaling. And then the reward is you get this physical sensation that your brain has learned to associate with, being
Hmm.
de-stressed, feeling more relaxed. And
Yep.
so if you can keep the cue and the reward constant, but change the routine, that's how you fix it. So imagine you,
Hmm.
you keep the cue constant, so you're going to feel a little bored or a little stressed or anxious, and
Hmm.
you're going to want that feeling of relief. But rather than hitting a jewel, maybe instead you could go for a jog, you could meditate, you could do 10 push ups, you could just
Yep.
take a break and go call your friend. There are
Hmm.
lots of ways that you can overcome your initial negative habit by
Hmm.
switching it out with a more positive habit.
Yeah. I think I love the push-up thing because it's so simple, right? It
Hmm.
probably takes less actual work than pulling out your cigarette. Because if you want to smoke a cigarette, you have to go outside. Maybe not with a jewel, but with a cigarette, you have to go outside to a smoking area, pull it out, light it, all this stuff. If you get the feeling of anxiety or whatever it is that triggers the need to smoke a cigarette, if you just drop down and do 10, 20, 30 push-ups, you're probably going to feel a lot better
Yeah.
afterwards too, because you get that those it's like a small rush of endorphins. It's not a perfect workout or by any means, but it's something. You're doing something physical and
Oh
you
yeah,
get
you'll
the
have
reward
that
from it.
real physical sensation too, which is
Mhm.
why it's like an effective replacement for something that
Mhm.
also gives you a physical sensation.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think another important point is that the more you do it, like each time that you do push-ups instead of hitting your jewel, that becomes a competing routine, is the term for
Mhm.
it. And the more that you give power to that competing routine, meaning the more times that you actually do the routine that's better for your health, that becomes
Mhm.
more powerful in the brain relative to your old routine.
Yeah.
But it's still true that oftentimes, whether it's alcoholics or gambling addicts or smoking addicts, whenever you encounter a really difficult situation in your life, like if you find out one of your parents has cancer, or you just lost your job, or someone broke up with you, or whatever it is,
Mhm.
that's when you tend to return to your old habit. Because even, no matter
Mhm.
how many times you've done it, the right way with push-ups or whatever, it's
Mhm.
still more deeply rooted, whatever your original habit is. And so through AA and other studies of people who are addicts, they found that the other X factor that you need to overcome those trying times is belief.
Hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be like religious belief, but to have some belief in a higher power, or really to believe that you can overcome the
Yeah.
difficulty,
Yeah.
whether it's spirituality or just,
Yeah.
some sort of faith, belief, or, support with a network that all cares about something higher than whatever your individual life situation is. That's
Mhm.
been the X factor that's associated with alcoholics who overcome their addiction rather than ones that relapse.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually a really important point. And what do you think in terms of, so a lot of people will try to form new habits, a lot of people try to break old habits right around the time of the release of this video, which is New Year's.
Yeah, yeah.
So why is it that so many people start out with such positive intention and maybe fall off these new habits
Yeah.
don't fully form, and it's just an issue that is seen year after year that people just kind of fall, they let their
They
habits
fall
fall
off the
by the
wagon.
wayside. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would say the biggest reason is that people with New Year's resolutions, they focus on the what rather than the how.
Hmm.
And what that means is they focus on goals rather than systems. So a lot of people in the new year will say, I want to lose 20 pounds in the new year, or I want to lose 20 pounds by summer of 2020. Or they'll say, I want to read 20 books next year, or whatever it is. They
Hmm.
set a
Yeah.
goal. And the problem with goals is that they are binary in that you either succeed or fail. Like if you read less than
Hmm.
20 books, you failed. If you read more or at least 20 books, you succeed.
Yeah.
Um, so they're not flexible at all. And the other thing is, they're not that relevant for your day to day life because they don't tell you how you're going to accomplish your goal. They just
Yeah.
tell you what you want to do. So
Yeah.
instead of setting a goal like, I want to read 20 books next year, create a system that says, in the new year, every night when I'm laying in bed before I go to sleep, I'm going to read. Even if it's just one page, even if it's just one word, I'm going
Hmm.
to read. And that's my system. I'm going to go to sleep every night and read a little bit before I fall asleep.
Hmm.
And that is a much better system. Or same thing with if you want to diet, they've found that usually when a nutritionist or a doctor says, okay, here's what you should eat vegetables, you should eat fruit, you should stay away from carbs, you should take the stairs instead of the escalator. They give them
Hmm.
all these things, and it's just too much. It's too big of a sudden change
Yep.
that you're
Yep.
way better off having a system of small wins where, for instance, they found much better results if the only thing you do is just write down everything you ate at least 1 day a week. It's a very
Yep.
small commitment. But
Hmm.
if you do that, it starts to create awareness. So you're actually aware of your own habits. And that's really the foundation of changing habits is first to become aware of them. Become aware of the
Yep.
habit loop. If you can
Hmm.
get in the habit of writing down each habit loop, like,
Hmm.
12:30 p.m., I feel a little bit hungry, a little bit tired, and I'm just a little bit frustrated with the work I'm doing. Therefore, I'm
Hmm.
going to the cafeteria and grabbing a cookie. Then,
Yeah.
you see the trigger, the routine, and the reward. And then you can start to ask deeper questions like, well, what is it really? Is it mostly that I'm frustrated with work, mostly that I'm hungry? Is it mostly that I just need a break?
Yeah.
Because different routines might be better substitutes depending on what the real reason is for you to be doing the routine that you're doing. Like if it really is hunger, you should be able to have an
Hmm.
apple instead of a cookie, and that's fine. If it really is like frustration with work, maybe just, calling a friend or going over and talking to a colleague or taking a walk around the block and, listening to a meditation podcast. Maybe
Hmm.
that'll do the job. But yeah,
Yeah.
awareness is really the foundation, and they even have awareness training as something that they do to help addicts.
Interesting. Yeah, and one other thing that or I guess a couple other things I would point out in terms of, making these habits more sustainable is kind of like you said, make it so where the new habit, if anything, just restrict your previous, um, like instead of adding a whole bunch of stuff to your life,
Replace.
replace or even just get rid of a couple of things. Like you don't necessarily need to start adding all of these new things. But for example, I think the number one diet example is don't change anything that you eat, just change when you eat. Change, and basically this would be to do some sort of intermittent fasting, which has a pretty good adherence rate. And that's one way to do it because you're not changing anything except for when you eat. You can still eat the same exact stuff, which I think is a really important thing. That's one thing that Tim Ferriss talks about a lot in his like habit forming stuff, especially around nutrition, is
Hmm.
just if you do something that you stick to, that is easy to stick to, and you can just design your life and design systems around
Right,
doing these
right.
things, you're you're going to be successful. Even if it's not a perfect diet, it's going to be successful because it's easy. And like
Exactly.
and like we were saying in the beginning, these new habits require a lot of energy at the start. And the reason the old ones went out is because they require a lot less energy. And as humans, our brains will do literally anything to conserve energy. That's just the nature of
Hmm.
being alive.
Yeah, focusing on the
Yeah.
long term is so key, and that's
Yeah.
systems focus on the long term. What is sustainable for you, rather
Mm,
than what's a goal that's just a lofty target that you would like to happen in 2020, but
mm,
realistically, it's not that feasible.
And I also find that at least one thing that worked well for me a while ago, I used to have a really crappy diet. I would literally eat anything. I would eat like donuts, cookies, sugar, like anything. And this was during my cross country days, so it didn't really matter, but it still mattered because it was affecting performance probably. Um, but one of the things that I think helped was reframing how you view some of these things. If you want to cut something out, I don't say, "Oh, I'm not eating cookies right now." You identify as a person that does not eat cookies, right? Like
Right. Yeah.
I am not, I just don't do this at all. And it's so easy. Like for
Yeah.
me yeah, at this point, I can basically turn down anything that I don't think serves me because it's just like this reframing of stuff
Well,
in my
that's
mind.
awareness
Yeah.
training. So they say
Yeah. Yeah.
that if you can really pay close attention to the routine that you're in and
Hmm.
ask yourself, how tasty is this cookie really? Like, what are the rewards I'm really getting for this as you eat it? You might realize that, yeah,
Hmm.
it is really tasty and delicious, the first cookie, but the second one, I'm sort of just eating it out of habit, and
Yeah.
I don't actually get that much of a benefit from it because I've already had my
Hmm.
main satisfaction. So the more you can
Yep.
like really pay close attention to, especially whatever your bad habits are,
Uh-huh.
that's how you have the power to change them. It's like first you have awareness, then the next layer is willpower training. And
Hmm.
this is basically the notion that the more whatever you do, you become stronger the more that you do it. So actually,
Hmm.
Sean Hayes, one time we were at Neuhaus and he was getting in shape for the final season of Will and Grace,
Hmm.
and he just got back from the snack bar and he had a bag of nuts, and he's like, every time I go to the counter and I see a delicious cookie and I order the nuts instead, my willpower gets a little bit stronger.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's like so true. The more times you can actually feel the trigger of, oh, I want a cookie, and then you instead get the nuts, which that's a replacement. You're not just
Hmm.
not getting anything, so that
Hmm.
follows the golden rule of
Yeah.
habit change.
Yeah.
You're becoming stronger. The more you do that, the more willpower you'll have. And this extends to all areas of your life. Like it's the
Hmm.
same reason why for me, like I go to yoga every morning. That's one of my keystone habits, and maybe we can talk about keystone habits next.
Yeah.
But that's something that to me, like when I'm, in plank and my body's shaking and my mind is telling me like just take a break, just put your knees down, like you've done enough. But then I
Hmm.
still resist that and I relax my face and I just stay zen and mindful. That
Hmm.
carries over to all aspects of my life. So if I'm having
Hmm.
a coworker who's getting really emotional and is, maybe shouting or something,
Hmm.
I can stay zen because I've already practiced my willpower regularly and I've grown stronger at resisting those more primal urges.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Maybe talk a little bit about Keystone Habits.
Yeah. So I guess I mean for me, my I would say my main keystone habit is I wake up and go to sleep at the same time every day, and
Hmm.
I go to yoga in the morning as soon as I wake up. And for me, that it makes me not only does it make me more physically fit, so I have more energy and I'm more able to do what I need to do because I'm healthier. It also
Hmm.
makes me more, you know, I'm more emotionally stable. I'm a better person
Hmm.
to work with. I'm more
Hmm.
collaborative. I have a better
Hmm.
relationship with my wife. So it extends to all areas of life. And
Hmm.
the same thing could be said about if for another, here are some that are grounded in statistics. So if for kids whose families eat dinner together each day, those kids end up doing better in school, they're more popular, and they're less likely to become addicted to drugs and alcohol. So that's
Hmm.
a family keystone habit that creates
Yeah.
really good effects. Another
Hmm.
one is if you make your bed each morning. This is something I don't do, but I kind of wish I did. It helps you follow through on your commitments and it helps you budget finances more responsibly. They've done statistical studies. They found that people who make
Oh,
their beds
really?
each day actually end up managing their finances more responsibly
Huh.
because it creates accountability like each day.
Yeah. Yep.
They also have found that there was one company that Alcoa, which is in the same book that you referenced, The Power of
Hmm.
Habit, and this company got a new CEO and they focused solely on worker safety. And they're using molten metal to create, steel frames and all of this. And
Yeah.
by focusing on worker safety, it improved every aspect of their business because they
Hmm.
had to have really good manufacturing protocols, they had to have really good communication to change the
Yeah.
process whenever someone did get injured. They had to always be, checking up on the quality and their process and making sure the process was totally flawless and foolproof. So it extended to all aspects of the company, and they ended up being one of the best performing, stocks in whenever the book
Hmm.
was written about them. So
Hmm.
yeah, these are examples of really good keystone habits, but of course there's also bad ones. Like if you always, smoke cigarettes when you're feeling stressed, or you overeat when you're stressed, or you just watch TV and sort of nap whenever you're stressed, then that's also going to carry over to other aspects of your life. And I
Hmm.
keep coming back to this concept that Alan Watts talks about, which is mutual arising, because
Hmm.
causality is kind of a low dimensional way of viewing the phenomena of life. It's not that
Okay.
by exercising you're causing all of these other positive effects. It's more that certain behaviors arise mutually. Like if you're the type of
Huh.
person that exercises, it's more likely that a successful work life will arise, and a successful romantic life will arise, and a successful just emotional life will arise.
Hmm.
So there are, I mean, you can almost imagine us as like these energy balls in the cosmos that are sort of like spreading out to these other energy areas, and they sort of mutually arise together. And
Hmm.
so I think the more you can sort of pull back the curtain and really view your life almost from like a third person perspective and see
Yeah.
what makes you tick, what makes you do the things you wish you didn't do, then
Hmm.
you can become totally empowered to basically change your own source code as you need.
Yeah. So I guess one question I have is, do you have any habits that you're trying to introduce in the new year, or do you do New Year's resolutions, or like do you try to make goals or
Yeah.
systems when the new year comes around?
Well, actually, I just changed one habit
Okay.
while prepping for this podcast because I was thinking about it, and that's that. I don't drink alcohol. I mean, sometimes I'll have it for like a special occasion, but I
Hmm.
prefer weed. It like helps me fall
Hmm.
asleep, helps me with stress.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like many people, I thought that vaping weed was a healthier way of consuming it. That's what
Hmm.
seemed logical at the time. But now that we've gotten much more information, and there's been all the studies about people who have had serious health effects from vaping, I
Hmm.
realized that it's more healthy for me just cut it out completely. But it had
Hmm.
kind of become part of my like evening routine, like,
Hmm.
and so what I did is I basically I replaced vaping with reading just entirely. And it's
Oh, interesting.
to me, reading is sort of a treat. Like it's something I
Yeah.
do at the end of a workday just to change my mindset and just enter like a new fantasy where I read a lot of Murakami, a lot of
Hmm.
fiction novels.
Yeah.
And and so whenever I'm feeling stressed now in the evening, I'll just go and read. And I still get the reward of like feeling de-stressed and just,
Hmm.
taking a break from life. But I'm replacing my old routine of like, hitting a vape pen with weed to now just like reading and sort of entering the fictional world of Murakami. And that's
Interesting.
that's my new. And since I made that decision, like I don't know, a week and a half ago, I have not vaped at all. And I threw out all
Interesting.
my vaping stuff, so I would have to
You just can't.
reorder it
Yeah.
in order to even get.
Yeah. And that's one way to make a system is just make it extremely difficult. Like if you want to stop eating cookies, you just remove the cookies from your house and you don't bring them in your house, right? So you just
Yeah.
increase the barrier to do that thing. But that's really interesting. That one of the things that I'm actually trying to do is read more fiction.
Oh,
Like
interesting.
that's
Wow.
so that's one of the habits that I will work on forming, and that'll be, you know, instead of looking at a screen, essentially, I would just kind of scroll through Reddit or Twitter or something. Instead of doing that, I just move to a book, whether that's audiobook or, an
Hmm.
actual book um,
And
over
what's
the
your
new year. So
system? What's going to be your system for doing that?
Well, so typically in the evenings, I'll just kind of hang out a little bit, chill, maybe scroll through Reddit, read some Twitter feeds, and I try to curate my Reddit and Twitter feed so it's actually interesting. Like I don't follow like
Hmm.
meme accounts and stuff like that.
It's
Um,
not all politics.
yeah, and I also don't follow a lot of that stuff either. So it's not like I don't think it's poisoning my mind really, but I I would just prefer to read a fiction book. And I actually just recently got a few Murakami
Oh, dude,
books.
which ones you got?
So I need to look back into it. It wasn't okay, it wasn't that recently. It was like a couple months ago, so I need to figure out which ones I actually have. Because I heard you recommend it a while ago. I was like,
Yeah, I
I
love his
he's
work.
oh yeah, it was when you were in Tokyo. I saw you like
Oh yeah,
Murakami book
yeah,
number one or number two, like you were just plowing through them
yeah,
when you were in Japan.
yeah.
Um,
I'm in his most recent one right now, Killing Commendatore,
uh,
and I was a little worried that maybe, he's in his 70s now, and I was like, is he still going to be as good as he's always been? And it is his most masterful novel yet, perhaps. I mean,
really.
I love his world because it's like he goes through the mundane day-to-day life,
Hmm.
like, oh, I'm cleaning my house and feeding my cat, and it's just like totally normal life stuff.
Hmm.
But then
Yeah.
something supernatural will take place, and it like spins your whole perspective on the world. And
Uh,
he's just always kind to everyone. He never has a mean thought about anyone. So it's almost like he's just an observer of all the oddities of our life, whether it's habitual or just the
wow.
weird patterns that people
Hmm.
embody. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of related to habits in
Hmm.
that respect.
Now I'm more excited to start reading him.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I mean,
So,
oh, go ahead.
well, I was just going to see what your thoughts were on how habits will change in the future. Because one of
Hmm.
the things that I've been thinking about is how technology is like shaping our habits. It's almost like it's really getting deep, especially the apps that are really I say well designed, but it's designed from a usability perspective. It's
They're
almost like
effective.
yeah, like they're effective at getting your eyes on the screen. And I worry about that. And I'm curious what your thoughts are,
Definitely.
going
So
forward.
I'll pull back the curtain a little bit from the way marketers view things.
Hmm.
And essentially, you are the biggest goal if you're a marketer, which I am a marketer, your biggest win is to make your product or service become part of the habits of the customer's life. So, for
Hmm.
instance, if you can build a product like Instagram or Twitter that it's become so ingrained that whenever someone has a second at a red light or at a crosswalk or even in a meeting that's been going on for a little too long and you habitually pull it out, that's like gold. That is the biggest
Yeah.
win. And
Hmm.
marketers have been really effective at this. Like one example that they reference in the Power of Habits book is Pepsodent toothpaste. And
Hmm.
before Pepsodent toothpaste came out, a very small percentage of people, it was only a third of Americans actually brushed their teeth and used toothpaste.
Hmm.
And by the time, 10 years later, after the marketing campaign had fully taken hold, 65% of Americans used Pepsodent or just used
Wow.
toothpaste and brushed their teeth. And the way they did this, like so many toothpaste had failed at that time. There had been many attempts. But the
Hmm.
reason Pepsodent won is first because they focused on the reward of you'll have a great smile, you'll be beautiful, you'll be more attractive, which implies that you'll have more romantic partners. And that's like always like marketing gold strategy.
Yeah.
But the other reason why it was so effective is that they had the toothpaste, they added a little bit of citrus, which made your mouth tingle after you brushed your teeth. And people who used Pepsodent toothpaste would then associate cleanliness and attractiveness with that tingling sensation. And other toothpaste brands didn't have that tingling sensation. So you had the reward that was sort of the abstract reward of having a better smile and being more attractive, but you also
Yeah.
had the physical sensation of, wow, this stuff must really be working. It's tingling in my mouth. And I'm sure everyone can, knows of certain face washes that also tingle, or
Yeah.
shampoos are meant to be extra foamy, even though it doesn't actually help clean your hair. They add the foaming agent because it's like, it just makes you feel like it's working more even though it doesn't actually change
Yep.
anything. Same thing with like Febreze was another super effective product. Febreze almost got killed as a product because no one was buying it. And their whole ad campaign was focused on, this will eliminate odors. Do you have bad odors? This will eliminate them. But no one
Hmm.
was buying it because the trigger of smelling a bad odor wasn't strong enough. Because if you're living in a smelly place, you tend to not really notice the odors. So the people who needed it
Hmm.
weren't really buying it. But then they struck gold when they changed the strategy. So that was saying, oh, you've just cleaned your room. The end of your cleaning ritual is spraying a little bit of Febreze, and that smell is associated with a job well done. The house is fully clean. So it's not just that your house
Mm.
looks clean, it also smells clean. And once people did that, then they felt like their house wasn't truly clean until they actually had sprayed the Febreze. So that the
Interesting.
customer ended up being people who actually were already neat freaks, didn't really need the product, but it became part of their ritual and it gave them a physical olfactory sensation that they could associate with a job well done, a house well cleaned.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe now we could get into the future scenarios, like how all of this changes going forward, unless you had anything else you wanted to touch on before we get there.
No, I think that's good. I have
Okay.
a bit more to say about that, but I think it's good to talk about it in the context of the future scenarios.
So, what do you think about the worst case scenario?
Worst case scenario.
My worst case scenario is building on what I was saying about marketers and products getting more and more effective at persuading people.
Hmm.
So it does seem to be the case that as time goes on, products become better and better at persuading people to take action. And there are a few triggers and rewards that every human being, every Homo sapien resonates with, which is attractiveness. This is going to make you survive better. It'll make you reproduce better. It'll make you more of a valuable member of society, or more esteemed in your own mind or the mind of your friends.
Hmm.
They're only going to get better and better at persuading people to take action. And part of my concern is that people will increasingly fall victim to the habit loops that marketers put in front of them. So
Hmm.
it's never been easier to spend all day watching Netflix and vaping and going on social media and angrily tweeting about Trump and playing video games until the wee hours of the night, and then not having a good sleep schedule, and then you don't eat well because you're tired, so you overeat, and then the overeating becomes part of your routine. And it does seem like a lot of the issues of America in particular are habit driven. We talked about sleep in our
Hmm.
last episode. There's a sleep epidemic where people are not getting enough sleep.
Yeah.
We have a healthcare epidemic because an incredible, I think it's like half of Americans or 40% of Americans are obese.
Hmm.
And that's why healthcare costs are rising.
Hmm. And part of that is due to the marketing efforts of companies like McDonald's and these really unhealthy food chains and food brands.
Yeah. And they even found through a study that most families that eat fast food regularly, they don't even intend to eat fast food regularly. It just becomes part of their habit. And that's part of the
Hmm.
genius of McDonald's and other fast food restaurants. They give you such a consistent experience that you have this overwhelming sense of familiarity. Even if you're in Timbuktu, you can walk into a McDonald's and get that same French fry that just melts on your tongue with grease and salty flavor bursting as soon as it reaches
Yeah.
your mouth. And you
Yeah.
have, and so yes, it's like that's going to become more and more powerful. The question is, will society become more powerful at resisting those negative habits and taking
hmm
control of their life?
Yeah, I'm with you on the worst case. Now, I'll touch on one thing that's sort of a extension of what you were saying is uh, governments also have the ability to drive the habits of their citizens.
Hmm.
And I think that China is doing a good job of driving habits of obedience and, like not speaking out and all of these other actions and habits that we associate with China. And I think that's just as dangerous or more dangerous than a lot of the marketing aspects of habit forming because there are good products. Like for example, and I won't get too much into it because this is the worst case, but there are good products that that can help you form actually meaningful and
Right.
life-changing in a positive way
Like your Apple
habits.
Watch 10,000 step
Yeah,
circle or
exactly.
meditation apps.
Yeah,
Yeah.
checking and getting notifications on my sleep with my Aura ring.
Hmm.
Same thing. So yeah, I think that when governments deliberately use their power and influence to change habits of the citizens, I think that's also one of the worst case scenarios.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm a big believer in the power of automation to take the workload off of humanity so that we can actually accomplish what's most fulfilling to us rather than just toiling away our hours.
Hmm
But it's not such a crazy fear that with automation and with UBI that people may fall into the habit of just spending all day, watching TV or playing video games, sitting on the
Yeah,
couch. Like if you don't really have to get up and work, I wonder if some percentage, I'm not saying everyone will, but if some percentage of people will just sort of let life happen to them rather than actively living their life.
right. Yeah, I think it's extremely possible, and that's another thing that I'm really afraid of in the worst case. But maybe to lighten it up a little bit, what do you think about the best case?
Best case scenario.
Yeah, my best case scenario is that scene in Westworld where the one robot character has her own, like, has the iPad with all of her stats and she can, like,
Hmm
that would be my best case scenario. Like, we're all essentially that robot that has the ability to change our stats as we see fit,
hmm
meaning the highest consciousness level of humanity, which is associated with the prefrontal cortex, that has
hmm
maximum power and control over our life. So there's no separation between the type of person you want to be and the type of person you actually are based on how habits are, sort of leading your life in a way you might not intend.
hmm
I would say, just like we say a lot on this podcast, having freedom to the fullest extent is big. And I think how you get there is superior tracking and awareness
hmm
of how you're actually living your life. So I'm very optimistic that now we have sleep trackers, we have fitness trackers, we know that food journaling is a really good practice. So the more that we're able to be aware of our actions, also screen time. Apple now has
hmm
screen time, so you can actually see how much time am I wasting each day in Twitter or in whatever app. For
hmm
me, Twitter is the biggest chunk of time that I spend, and I get a lot of value out of it, but I could
hmm
probably do with a little bit less time each
Yeah,
day.
yeah.
So the more we spread awareness about how we're living our life, the more we'll be able to change it. And part of my best case scenario, just to build on that, is if we can incorporate awareness training into our education and upbringing, and if we can also incorporate willpower training into our education and upbringing, that
Hmm.
is the best path forward. There's the famous study where they have a kid in a room and they say, okay, here's a marshmallow. You can eat this marshmallow right now, or I'll leave the room, come back 5 minutes later with a second marshmallow, and then if you wait, you can eat both of them. And kids who waited the
Yeah.
full 5 minutes and ate two marshmallows, they tracked their progress later in life, and they were healthier, they were more successful in school, they had better jobs, they had better relationships than
Hmm.
the kids who just ate the marshmallow immediately. And the key is, this is not something that just, oh, you're born with a certain willpower. It's something that really is you could train it like a muscle.
Yeah. Yep.
Willpower is a muscle, and the more you train it, the better you'll be at it. And I think you can
Hmm.
you can go too far. Like you mentioned China. I think in China it's like people are have so much willpower to restrain themselves that it's almost like they've relinquished part of their humanity of what would otherwise give them the courage to rebel. And like it seems like Hong Kong doesn't have the same amount of willpower training to just do what they're told as the mainland,
Hmm.
and that's why they are fighting for their beliefs. But
Yeah.
it's been so ingrained in the mainland that it's just like I think it's been a little bit detrimental to their society. And I don't consider myself religious in the context of any particular religion. I do consider myself spiritual.
Hmm.
But I was having a conversation with my wife recently, and some kids who we know, I won't say who they are, but they're very rambunctious and not the most well behaved kids. And
Hmm.
my wife's mom was saying like, man, I wish they had grown up going to church. And it's not because, oh, religion is will solve everything, but it's more that if every Sunday as a little kid for 1 hour you have to sit still and be respectful, and it's not about you, it's about this
Yeah.
bigger
Yeah.
concept that's being discussed at the front of at the front of the church,
Hmm.
that will help you later in life. So I'm not saying that's what everyone needs to do, but like meditation class would be another example. You can teach kids
Hmm.
meditation early on, and that will give them far greater willpower and awareness that will be a tool for them throughout their entire life. So that's my
Yeah.
best case scenario. We ingrain those qualities in kids early on, and people practice that throughout their life.
Hmm. And I love that meditation is being taught to kids now. Like
Hmm.
Annika Harris has a whole segment on the Waking Up podcast that is meditation for kids, which is
Yeah.
awesome. When I saw that, it was a little mind blowing. And also when she was on the Making Sense podcast, um, she talked about how some of these kids had like not profound to an adult realizations, but definitely profound
Yeah.
relative to other kids. And I think when kids go through this and they can learn this sort of mental restraint, then that's one of those keystone habits that we were talking about.
Definitely.
And I think it's just a really important thing. But yeah, my best case is actually super similar to yours, where basically we have complete sovereignty over our habits, and if we want to change something, we can change it. Like we have power over our biology. And if someone is like, yeah, smoking doesn't serve me anymore, I don't want to do it, then we can break it. And
Yeah.
maybe part of this is with psychedelics. Like if we can break habits with psychedelics, with these new tools that are coming out and being researched more heavily, that is actually a best case that is attainable. Like we
Right.
can truly change habits that are deeply ingrained when we go through these sessions with trained psychotherapists, using drugs like LSD or like mushrooms, and that I think is the way of the future, to some extent.
Yeah, Michael Pollan wrote a great book about it, How to Change Your Mind.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
he talks about how we talked about this in the Future of Reality, I believe.
Mm.
But he talks about this, he uses this metaphor of your mind as a ski slope where it's just covered in snow, and your
Hmm.
thought patterns that are the most ingrained, It's like sending a skier down the same path over and over and over again. And that
Yep.
becomes so ingrained that you stop even being aware that you're going down that path. And what psychedelics do is it basically like removes all those extra layers of the snow so that you
Good.
have more of just like just like fresh powder that you
Yeah.
can choose which paths you go down. And that's why it's been so effective for so many people to get out of their addiction or to get out of their
Hmm.
negative thought patterns of something traumatic that happened to them when they were little or something that happened to them when they were
Hmm.
overseas at war. So
Yep.
I think psychedelics are definitely a big tool that should be used, especially for people that have more extreme cases.
Mhm.
Most likely scenario.
I think the likely case is really a mix of the best case and worst case, but I see a lot of positive trends, right? I think that these psychedelics are part of the best case, but it's also the likely case that we start to learn how to use these tools in an effective way so we can change our biology ourselves and really get deep into, the brainstem, the basal ganglia, and change our habits and form new habits and really have these profound realizations. And that's not the only tool. We might be able to directly control our habits through some sort of, you know, brain machine interface that
Right.
stimulates our brains. Like if we have some sort of neuronal pathway that gets triggered when we're going to smoke a cigarette, maybe there's a way to like reroute those
And
to
they've
some
already
extent.
done this actually, where they talk about this in The Power of Habit, where you can actually do very mild electroshocks to certain parts of the brain that will basically stunt certain thought patterns that are associated with craving, for instance. So anytime you get a specific thought pattern for craving, you get this little electric jolt that sort of stunts it in its path. And that's actually been pretty effective. It's still, you would have to consider for yourself whether that's worth it to get that sort of thing implanted in your brain. But it just, again, this just shows that there are pathways that can be changed, and it's not something that's really ingrained with who you are. It's more that it's just a thought pattern that you've been feeding with energy for so long that it's
Yep.
become automatic. But it doesn't mean it has to stay automatic. You can change it.
Yep.
So I would say for my most likely scenario, I'm optimistic in that I think younger generations will become more and more aware of their habits and they'll become more and more able to change their habits. And one example of this is take the classic example of you get a phishing email from a Nigerian prince and they say something, oh, click on this link, or, those don't usually work anymore, but oftentimes now you'll get ones that are like, hey, there's important information about your bank account. Please log in here. And then you
Yep.
enter your password information and then they steal all your money. And
Hmm.
this has happened. It's even happened at places where I've worked. And I'll tell you one thing, it's never the millennials or the Zoomers that click on those links. It's almost always the boomers and the older and or maybe Gen X.
Hmm.
But that to me says that younger people, because they're digital natives, because they grew up in this environment of products that are using data to persuade people and they're always optimizing to be more and more effective at that persuasion, they
Hmm.
themselves are becoming better at identifying and defending against the persuasion. So my most likely scenario is that, yeah, I think it's going to be tough for older people because they have the same ingrained habits, but they're facing newer, better methods of persuading them.
Hmm.
Whereas for younger people, I think they're just going to become better and better at, withstanding the slings and arrows of product marketers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one thing I will say, just sort of to bring my most likely to a conclusion, is that the Buddha was able to overcome his mental habits of craving under the Bodhi tree thousands of years ago. he understood how his own mind was working, and he also understood the absurdity of always craving something that's more. And that's how he achieved enlightenment. And I think that's very telling. We can follow the lesson of the Buddha by really using our prefrontal cortex to analyze the rest of our brain, the more reptilian primal part of our brain, the basal ganglia, the brainstem, and recognize it for what it is, and recognize how absurd the behavior is, maybe even chuckle at how absurd it is. And then we will be free from those mental constraints. And I think it's something that together we can, reach that higher plane of consciousness. And by doing so, we'll be able to achieve truly great things in the world, whether it's colonizing space or overcoming the challenges of AI or climate change or just living a more fulfilling life. I think it's possible, and I think that as time goes on, there are going to be more and more people like the Buddha, like Jesus Christ, who are sort of able to get up to that next level of the higher consciousness plane, and that hopefully that'll create a better society for everyone.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Awesome. Well, we hope you guys liked this New Year's episode. We wish you the best in 2020 as you work to change your habits and become the best version of yourself. And I'd also just wanted to thank everyone for listening to Hence the Future. We've been doing this only for a little over a year, but it's been really great, and we've gotten some great support on social and YouTube comments and everything. So thank you guys, everyone, for listening. This has been the Future of Habits, and we'll see you in 2020.
The past, the present, and the future.
Our computer is picking up a strange signal.
The past, the present, and the future, baby.
What's the world coming to?
The past, the present, and the future. The past, the present, and the future, baby. The past, the present, and the future.
What time to stimulate the consciousness?
The past, the present, and the future, baby.
Behind the strange signal is an alien
The
intelligence.
past, the present, and the future. The past, the present, and the future, baby.
It's possible.
Hey Futurists, if you've made it this far, you might be wondering who created the Hence the Future theme song. It was created by the Walden Brothers, and you can find them on Spotify. The Walden Brothers also produced the sound bites for the worst case, the best case, and the most likely future scenarios. At Hence the Future, we're always looking for ways to improve the quality of our episodes and our predictions. To that end, we're building a team of researchers to curate the most authoritative and highly vetted sources as the foundation for every episode. If you'd like to support these efforts, you can donate a small monthly amount at anchor.fm/hencethefuture. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate your support.